Mustafa Kemal presented his vision for Turkey's recovery after the First World War at the Izmir Economics Congress in 1923. A rapid and efficient development of the national economy was a primary part of the vision, with development of large-scale industries that could utilize the rich natural resources of Turkey in making higher-value products. In those years, due to the limited transportation facilities, it could take weeks to travel from one end of Turkey to another, but more importantly, it was not possible to transport Turkey's natural resources to support the industries. Turkey's rapid economic growth was therefore almost impossible. The development of railways was the cornerstone of Atatürk's vision for Turkey's growth. When the Republic of Turkey was founded in 1923, it had a railway network of 4,000 kilometers, mainly owned by foreign concessionaires. Most of these railways were poorly maintained. The government of Turkey then decided to take almost every railway concession back and undertake the rehabilitation of these railways by its own resources. Rehabilitation took approximately 4 years. In addition to this work, the planning of new railways commenced. This documentary movie depicts the construction processes of the most important of these new railways, the coal line and the copper line.
Türkiye'nin içinde bulunduğu, özellikle toplumsal hayat anlamında içinde bulunduğu koşullar, geçmişin bıraktığı mirasın yanı sıra savaşın da etkileriyle güçlü yeniden inşa girişimlerini gerektiriyordu ve ilk yıllarda genel olarak tüm toplumsal kesimler için zorlu denebilecek koşullar olduğunu söyleyebiliriz. Bir iktisadi kalkınma hamlelerinin yeni denendiği, sanayinin oldukça sınırlı olduğu bir dönem bu. Daha çok tarımsal ekonominin, tarımın ekonomideki ağırlığının yaklaşık %80'in üzerinde olduğu bir dönem. Kent merkezlerinin az gelişmiş olduğu bir sürecin içerisinde gelişme hamleleri yürütmeye çalışan bir Türkiye Cumhuriyeti ile karşı karşıyayız.
Since there was not enough technical capability and financial strength available in Turkey at that time, the government searched for railway design and construction companies who could also finance the cost of construction of the coal line and the copper line. These two lines, which have a total length of about 1,000 kilometers, are the northern line, also called the coal line, which runs from Irmak to Zonguldak, and the southern line, also called the copper line, which runs from Fevzi Pasha to Diyarbakir. However, the government did not find interested companies from the European countries, who were themselves recovering from the First World War.
But then a company from Sweden called Nyqvist and Holm, and trading under the name of NOHAB, they approached the Turkish government as part of that discussion between the government and NOHAB. NOHAB was given a letter of intent for provision of 100 locomotives, 1,500 railway cars, and about 1,000 kilometers of railway lines. NOHAB was a manufacturing company. They could build locomotives and railway cars, but they had no idea about how to make a railway line. Their share of all this which Turkey wanted to have was about 10%, 9 to 10% of the total, whereas the railway construction would be in an order of 90% of the total budget. So initially, the NOHAB went to the big Swedish companies and tried to get them on board to help them on this project here, because they really wanted to sell the rolling stock to Turkey. But they found no interest in Sweden. Then they contacted a company in Denmark called Tilbyde and also another company under the name of Jørgen Saxild, and that was later on called Kampsax. And these companies, they were quite excited by the idea of coming to Turkey and build 1,000 kilometers of railways.
NOHAB had managed to reach an agreement with a Swedish bank, Göteborg Handelsbank, for financing their part of the project, but the Danish partners were not involved in this agreement and therefore at risk. In order to solve this problem, the group continued negotiations internally and with the Swedish bank. Eventually, and just before the signing of the contract for the project, the bank agreed to undertake financing of the entire project. The group was now fully prepared for the project's actualization. A contract was signed between the Republic of Turkey and NOHAB on February 7, 1927. After that, two of the three founders of the company Kampmann, Kirchhoff and Saxild, Mr. Jørgen Saxild and Mr. Per Kampmann, decided to move to Istanbul to manage the realization of the project.
For the Danish companies, this project was a golden opportunity for making a foundation for the future growth of their companies, for the future development, if they did everything right and came out successful. But if they did not, they could easily be wiped out, because this is a mega project which cannot be played with. It has to be done in the correct way all the way through. Mustafa Kemal's vision was dependent on the capabilities of the Swedish and the Danes. And I think the government in Turkey showed enormous courage by assigning this huge project to companies from Scandinavia who were not used to the Turkish culture, who were not used to the Turkish high mountains and wild rivers, as I mentioned. But I also think the Danish companies were very courageous in accepting this assignment, well knowing the risk, but also managing the risk and getting people in who could actually do the job. And I think that is the story which we like and which I think has to be told, because this project was really unique.
With the conclusion of the agreement, very dynamic times began in Copenhagen. The Kampsax engineers were very experienced in project management, but had no experience in the field conditions of Turkey. The ultimate goal was to ensure the job was done properly, and the Kampsax management therefore decided to assign the best engineers from the Danish companies, as well as competent engineers with special expertise from other countries to work on the project. When the teams came to Turkey, their hopes were at least as high as those in Turkey. Although their countries, cultures, and languages were different, their excitement was the same. Many challenges awaited those hopeful and courageous engineers. The most important of the difficulties to be overcome was the lack of maps of the regions where the train lines were to be built, and the lack of knowledge of the characteristics of the terrain. The first thing to do for Kampsax was to assemble teams of engineers, surveyors, and geologists. Kampsax sent these teams to the field to conduct detailed mapping and gather information for the design. The teams had to complete all of these works and calculate the estimated cost of construction within 14 months after signing of the contract. Kampsax and Sobi and Lerche transferred 150 foreign engineers to Turkey. Most of the engineers were from Denmark, but they also came from Norway, Sweden, Austria, Switzerland, and other European countries. Due to the limited time given for mapping and surveys, some teams actually started work before the contract was signed.
My dear family, I apologize for not giving proper information until now. Our journey has been very satisfying. At 8:30 in the morning, we were woken up by Turkish customs in Edirne in an unpleasant way. A short time later, a nice guy appeared, explaining in Turkish to the customs officer that we are the Danish military commission. By the time we awoke, Gabriel Jensen's and my suitcases were rummaged, and binoculars were found in both of them. I also had cigars and chocolate. Since it was forbidden to bring cigars into the country, we experienced difficulties. Luckily, I saved my cigars. We arrived in Istanbul at 6:33 p.m. and got off the train to see a beautiful sunset over the Marmara Sea. There were 2 Danish and 1 Turkish engineer waiting for us at the train station. We went to a nice hotel. Currently, we have 27 engineers, including Swedish and Danish. 10 more Norwegians will arrive tomorrow. The next day, we took the day off and we started to tour the city. The city is very dirty and messy. I only saw 2 beautiful streets in Pera. But the Golden Horn and mosques are magnificent. There are beautiful views. We started working at Bakerhan at 09 o'clock on Wednesday. We opened boxes, organized equipment. The equipment is all the latest models and they are all great. I can't wait to go to the construction site. It will probably be a nice trip. Love, Tage.
Initial surveys were made, and it was found that most of the construction on the northern line would be on a rough and rocky terrain. Batebeli Mountains, Karaibik, and Balıkesik were just a few of them. On the southern line, difficulties were expected, such as building a bridge over the Euphrates River, crossing the Aladağ Mountains, and aligning the railway according to the rocks in the Tigris Valley. These difficulties did not discourage Kampsax engineers, but encouraged them in their work.
The result of this end up with that in some places you may have to make maps much wider to cover enough area to find out all these things and balance which line you should choose. And to cut down the time for this, time was of essence for the Turks. As the contracts have been made, they decided that newly introduced mapping methods of terrestrial photogrammetry could be very useful. That was developed in Switzerland, and they employed a Swiss company to come and make. Today you will send an airplane and have rather few photos and can map without any problems. You don't need to run around in the terrain like you have to earlier. The terrain was not easy many places. It was with mountainous gorges.
When the research was completed, the route of the railway was determined. The lands on this route were evaluated and the planning was completed. These surveys were made for the identification for the railway alignment. In some areas, very wide areas were required for determination of optimum alignments. Detailed maps were therefore made of those regions for the first time.
Dear Mom and Dad, yes, now we really start. I will be working under Engineer Mo in Part 2. He's a very nice guy, and I think he's one of the most talented department chiefs. It was a very comfortable evening yesterday. We are camping a little outside of Safranbolu. The first few days, we will explore the terrain around the camp. Then we will mark for precise leveling along the line. Love, Tage.
Turkish contractors did not have giant cranes, excavators, trucks, or other railway construction machines, and often the terrain conditions made it impossible to use such machines. For this reason, Almost the entire project was based on manual labor of the workers. At the peak of the construction, about 20,000 workers worked at the same time. In this respect, the project actually provided a source of livelihood for many families. The cost estimates, prepared by Kampsax after the surveys had been completed, showed a much higher cost than the government budget allocation. This was perhaps the first major problem encountered in relation to a successful completion of the project.
The cost estimate from Kampsax, which was quite reliable and very difficult to change, although many people tried it, was much higher than the government budget allocation. Then the government and Kampsax entered into discussions about what to do. The obvious thing is to say, let us reduce the scope of work. Let us cut away something which may not be needed or can be built by the Turkish government or the TCDD themselves. And these discussions ended up by the two parties agreed to eliminate the irregular harbor, the railway line from Filmen to Zonguldak, and some spur lines along the railway lines. Then the government, which was actually represented by the Minister of Finance, he realized that by giving 2 years extension of time, it would be possible for Turkey to finance the entire project. In that way, they could save all the bank charges to the Swedish bank. This time extension also resulted in a cost reduction especially on the southern line, because they could postpone, because of the 2 year extra time, postpone the letting of contracts at the other end. And on the southern line, we only worked from hevc and in towards Diyarbakir. On the northern line, we could work for 2 places. So there was a big cost saving there, and that was taken into consideration. These amendments to the contract were then all agreed after discussions, and all of it proved beneficial for both sides, for both parties. We wanted to push everything to Turkish contractors, partly for cost reasons and partly for transfer of technology to the companies in Turkey. And that's always been in Kampsax, I would say a must almost. You must make sure that the client or the contractors learn what you did, so they can take over when you're not there anymore.
Also, one of the great things which was very important for the group was to take care of the workers' condition during the work. And therefore, it was agreed with the government to introduce a medical services which was organized by Kampsax. And they employed doctors, with the chief doctor sitting in Istanbul, and then along the way of the tracks there were built infirmaries and lazarettes. There was established ambulance to take care of the workers. It really was important for the group that this was okay. Medicines examined the workers in the camps, have the consultation in the camp every morning, so if a worker feels uncomfortable, he could go to the medicine. And there was in total 138,000 consultations during the whole period. And there was all kinds of diseases. And this was free of charge for the workers. The contractors was charged 2% of their bills to contribute to this service sanitaire.
Another important need was the communication network. It was very important for the engineers to communicate both with each other and with the offices in Istanbul and Ankara. That's why 2 telegraph lines were constructed along the route. The instant communication established through these lines had a vital importance during the work. The transportation of natural stones from the quarries approved by the Kampsax engineers and materials such as cement, hydraulic lime, and rails that came from outside the country to the construction sites was a very important issue. The entry points for imported material were Derince and Filios for the northern line and Mersin for the southern line. But there were no seaports and suitable railway connections for the unloading and transportation of the materials in Filios and Mersin. Therefore, Kampsax decided to build 2 piers, one in wood and the other in reinforced concrete, and to construct connecting railway lines to the project lines or the railway network. In addition, service roads along the project railways were built. Construction of these unloading piers, the connecting railways, and service roads were of fundamental importance for being able to complete the project in time, but also for keeping the engineers motivated, who all had the completion dates in mind. Where railway construction had not yet reached the construction sites for bridges, tunnels, and other large works, construction materials had to be carried on trucks or carts pulled by oxen, or carried by camels, donkeys, and horses, depending on the terrain conditions. On the southern line alone, 100 trucks, nearly 300 donkeys, horses, and mules, and about 1,000 camels were used.
1920'ler ve 30'ların Türkiye'sinin iktisadi gelişkinlik düzeyi yönünden de, kültürel dönüşüm ve benzeri hususlar yönünden de bir homojenlik arz etmediğini aklımızda tutmamız gerekiyor. Kastettiğim ülkenin farklı bölgelerinin hem farklı sosyoekonomik koşullarda olması hem de özellikle yeni cumhuriyetin benimsemiş olduğu politikaların, kültürel yönelimlerin aynı şekilde yansımadığını aklımızda tutmamız gerekiyor. Mühendislerin, teknisyenlerin, uzmanların gelişiyle birlikte, buradaki yerli işçilerle birlikte inşa edilen demiryolları süreci bu anlamıyla Anadolu toplumunun bir ilk deneyim yaşamasını da sağlamış oldu. Hayatın akışı içerisinde karşı karşıya gelmediği farklı toplumlardan, farklı uluslardan insanlarla aynı amaç doğrultusunda ve hatta tırnak içinde aynı çatı altında birlikte çalışır hale geldiler. Bahsettiğimiz süreç içerisindeki bu birlikte çalışma da aslında tam da o modelde öngörülen şeyin bir toplumsal karşılık bulması yönünden de önemli sonuçlar getirmiştir diye düşünüyorum. Aynı zamanda da o ilk deneyim olarak tanımladığım kozmopolit bir yaşam tarzıyla henüz tanışmamış olan insanların kendisini böyle bir ortamın içinde bulması aynı zamanda dünya ile ilişki kurma ve dünyaya bakış bakımından da vizyon yönünden de oldukça geliştirici olmuştur diye düşünüyorum.
The reinforced concrete bridges were constructed by Kampsax, where contracts for the majority of other works were tendered and undertaken by Turkish contractors. In order for these works to be delivered within the budgets and on the planned dates, the construction had to be done systematically. Drawings were prepared in Kampsax's office in Istanbul, Bakırhan, and construction progressed as planned and in accordance with these drawings. Bridges and viaducts of less than 100 meters had to be completed in 3 to 6 months, and those of 100 meters or more had to be completed in 9 to 13 months. Most bridges were of the arch bridge type built with natural stones. The stone material in the mountains and the regions was generally of poor quality, but high-quality rock quarries were identified and tested for durability by the Kampsax engineers. Some of these rock blocks had to be transported over long distances before they reached their final position on a bridge. Timber was generally the preferred material for building the bridge scaffolding, but as there were no sawmills in Anatolia that could meet the demand for timber, sawmills were established especially near large bridges and at a few points with relatively easy access. In addition, some bridges had to be made of steel instead of natural stones. The construction period of these bridges took a little longer time than the others, as they had to be manufactured overseas, sent to Tyrkiet as construction kits in small units, then transported to the construction site, often by animals, and then assembled. The craftsmen in Anatolia were very experienced in stone processing, but when it came to timber and steel, craftsmen from Denmark took over. However, the Danish craftsmen worked closely with the craftsmen from Anatolia, and this working relationship not only proved beneficial for the timely completion of work, but it also made it possible for the Danish and the Turkish craftsmen to share information and mingle with each other. The construction of the tunnels continued in parallel with the bridges. Although dynamite was used, many tunnels were dug by workers with picks and shovels. The main purpose of simultaneous construction of tunnels, bridges, and stations was to use materials such as stone, rock, and sand obtained from tunnel excavations as construction materials in other constructions. For this reason, it was a very important element for the whole construction that the tunnel constructions were organized in accordance with the overall planning. Many workers were needed for digging, which was usually done by hand, and it was important that they worked synchronously. Local workers who knew the land were also very important. Engineers needed the knowledge of the workers and the local population about the land and rivers, and all this information contributed to the planning and control of the time for completion. The project included a total of 91 tunnels along the two lines. The total length of these tunnels was 22 kilometers. Although some of them were quite short, other tunnels were both long and in difficult terrain. The most difficult and majestic of the tunnels was the Battibelli Tunnel, located on the northern line, with a length of 3,440 meters. The completion time for the Battibelli Tunnel was estimated at 32 months, which in fact was considered a very short time. However, the 3.4-kilometer Battibelli Tunnel was actually completed in just 24 months, a great success for the joint forces of Danish engineers and Turkish workers and craftsmen. Building large structures in the 1920s was difficult almost everywhere in the world, but there were more challenges in Anatolia. Not only the financial impossibilities, but also the condition of the construction sites was quite challenging. Transport has always been a challenge for construction in a hard-to-reach terrain. An important part of the project was the construction of the stations. A total of 85 stations were built along the two lines. The distance between each of them was approximately 14 kilometers. The most important issue to be considered was the requirement for a 600-meter horizontal or near-horizontal site for the station, with a width allowing for 3 parallel tracks. The station buildings were generally built of stone. Water supply for the steam locomotives was provided, and for the large stations, extensive water pumping systems were installed. The planned completion time for stations with small lodging was 1 year, whereas large stations with depots, dormitories, and other facilities were required to be completed within 21 months. The gigantic bridge built over the Euphrates was a challenging structure, where both engineering and workmanship were of great importance. In order to build this bridge, the knowledge of the Kampsax engineers and the workmanship of both domestic and foreign craftsmen was required.
Here it was an examine of the ground. You try to find out to which level the flood could rise. Local villages was asked with their memories what have seen, and there was an old wooden bridge over Euphrates. In the end, the engineers feel rather convenient they have reached the right result. But before the things was coming to performing in the field, there come a flood, eroded some of the villages downwards during Euphrates, and the wooden bridge also disappeared. When it has settled again, one could see that the bridge has to be raised 4.7 meters and has to be extended with another 50 meters to allow for this water, which was 2.5 times was expected originally. And of course this led to a redesign, and there was made 3 proposals to the government, 2 in steel and 1 in reinforced concrete. And after lengthy discussions, it was the reinforced concrete which was chosen.
It was inevitable that working in such difficult terrain might bring risks and incalculable disasters. After the railway excavation of the southern line was completed, an estimated 100,000 cubic meters of the ground began to slide. This was a frighteningly high amount. Moreover, it was an unexpected event. It was fortunate that there was no loss of life in this landslide, and it was decided to move the line as far away from the risky area as possible. On the northern line, while the digging was underway, measures against landslide were made, but a large landslide nevertheless occurred. This landslide was stopped by making underground drainages, and again it was decided to move the line to a safer place, just like on the south line. After the impact of these landslides, and following the engineers' recommendations, construction of other safety measures were carried out, such as retaining walls and riverbank protections. As for any other construction, Kampsax spared no expense and took all necessary precautions in securing the safety of the railway lines. A further precaution was the blasting of a total of 12,000 cubic meters of rock in sliding-prone areas. As a result of all these measures, the risk of landslides was eliminated, and there were no other landslides during or after the completion of the work. Constructions were progressing, and the railways that were completed were being used for supplying construction materials to subsequent sections. In parallel with the completion of the constructions, the locomotives, railway cars, and all other railway vehicles produced in Nohab's factory in Sweden were delivered gradually. The tests of the delivered vehicles were carried out immediately, and these vehicles were put into use as the railway was completed.
In 1933, the government imposed restrictions in relation to exchange of lira to foreign currency. I think that happened in most countries at that time. You remember there was a very difficult period in the United States from 1928 to 1933 with restrictions on almost everything. And since Kampsax could not export the lira from Turkey, then in order to help the situation and not stop the work but proceed with the work, then they decided, why don't we buy goods in Turkey and export it to Denmark and sell it there? And what they bought was Turkish cigarettes, wine, carpets, nuts, dried fruit, and all these things. And that continued for a long time, so maybe more than a year, I think maybe 2 years or so, they continued with that. But suddenly they had got too much foreign currency by doing that, so they stopped, Kampsax stopped themselves, because they didn't need all the foreign currency, they need the lira to pay the contractors. So then in the Danish newspaper says, now everything has stopped, we cannot get the Turkish cigarettes and wine and carpets any longer. And they were not happy about that in Denmark.
Finally, the construction and vehicle deliveries were completed. Millions of tons of construction materials were used, and up to 20,000 people worked on the project. All of these hard-working people have a share in the honor of completing this almost impossible project within the agreed completion time of 1935. The agreed date for the completion of the project had been extended from 5 to 8 years, partly due to the change of payments. Of course, despite the additional time granted, the completion of the entire work in only 8 years was a great success.
Aslında demiryolu inşası bir ulusal birliğin tesis edilmesi anlamına da geliyor. Ülkenin farklı noktalarının birbirine bağlanması, birbiriyle entegrasyonunun sağlanması demek demiryolları. Ki örneğin 1930 yılında, 30 Ağustos 1930 tarihinde Ankara-Sivas Demiryolu'nun açılışında dönemin Başbakanı İsmet Paşa'nın yapmış olduğu konuşmada da en fazla vurgulanan hususlardan bir tanesidir bu. Demiryollarının bir ulusal birlik ve ulusal kurtuluş meselesi olduğu, ki özellikle Kurtuluş Savaşı'na yönelik analojilerle birlikte ilerleyen bir konuşmadır bu. Metaforik boyutunun dışında reel anlamda da özellikle merkezle çevrenin birbirine bağlanması, ülkenin farklı noktalarının birbiriyle entegre olması ve bu şekilde bir ulusal birliğin sağlanması gibi bir işlevi var.
The people of Anatolia, who fought for the sake of the Republic in the wars, but now living in remote areas, knew about the Republic only from hearsay after the war. The railways were now available for them to reach the Republic and democracy. Now they would be able to go to many places they wanted to see in their country, see big cities, and travel as they wished, comfortably, safely, and quickly. Anatolian people participated in these openings and celebrations with great enthusiasm. It wasn't just the big railroads that run through rough terrain that were laid out here. Besides the difficulties of the project, there were also cultural differences and interactions.
For more than 1,000 years, there have been a very good and close relationship between Denmark and Turkey. On this railway project, the relationship between the workers, foremen, engineers, between the Scandinavians and the Turkish staff grew to a level which is unseen in the world, I think. Working together for 8 years in difficult conditions that made the bonding between people. And especially when the Turkish contractors realized that Kampsax was actually very much aware of each and every staff's health, food, everything they wanted, because they could not accept that people suffered. That is the mentality we have in Denmark. But also you can say when people suffer, they don't work very well. So that could reflect on the time for completion of the whole railway. But it is primarily our heart which says people should have a proper life. And also between the government administrators in the sites and also in the head office in Ankara and Istanbul grew a very close relationship, working together over so many years and doing good things, achieve successes one after the other over such a long time. And thanks to this friendship representatives of the Republic of Turkey, in conversations with the Iranian administration, they mentioned that they should maybe consider to talk to Kampsax about the plans they had in Iran for the Trans-Iranian Railway. The Iranian administration, they considered the Turkish proposal and started negotiations with Kampsax NOHAB Group. As a result of these negotiations, Kampsax and NOHAB was awarded a contract for development of 1,000 kilometer long Trans-Iranian Railway, which is a famous project in the world, and that was done in 1933. There can be no doubt that the successful completion of the Turkish railway project became the foundation for Kampsax for the further development in Iran and later worldwide. So Kampsax in the 1950s up to the 1980s were one of the highly respected engineering companies in the world, with operations from South America to China, from Africa and up to the North Pole, so to say. They grew, but the whole thing started here in Turkey.
In today's global world, it is difficult to understand the magnitude and importance of this interaction. However, its importance can be better understood by considering the conditions of the era. With this project, where there were occasional disagreements and also happy times, all employees accomplished a job which the effects would continue long after them.